It started as a feeling I couldn't quite put into words. I wouldn't call it unhappiness. After all, my relationship with Mark had always been stable, comfortable. He was kind and thoughtful, the kind of partner who'd bring me coffee in bed or leave little notes on the fridge reminding me to take care of myself. But somewhere along the way, that comfort started to feel heavy. Like I was wrapped in a warm blanket that had begun to suffocate me. I couldn't explain it, not even to myself, but I knew something had changed. The night I met Simon, I wasn't looking for anything, or anyone. Emma, my best friend, had dragged me to a gallery opening downtown, promising it would shake me out of my funk. "Come on," she'd said, practically shoving a glass of wine into my hand. "It's art, it's free booze, and who knows? You might even have fun." I didn't expect to enjoy myself, but as I wandered through the gallery, pretending to study abstract paintings, I caught the eye of a man standing across the room. He smiled, a small, knowing smile, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I smiled back. He introduced himself as Simon, and we started talking. At first, it was small talk, our thoughts on the exhibit, the wine, the music playing in the background. But as the conversation deepened, I found myself drawn to him in a way that felt electric. "Do you ever feel like you're stuck?" he asked at one point, his gaze steady. The question hit me like a jolt. "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice quieter than I intended. He nodded, as if he understood something I hadn't yet admitted to myself. Simon and I didn't exchange numbers that night. We didn't even touch, apart from a brief handshake when we said goodbye. But something about the encounter stayed with me. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about him, his voice, his words, the way he seemed to see me in a way I hadn't been seen in a long time. At first, I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment of curiosity. But the truth was, Simon had awakened something in me. One evening, as Mark and I sat on the couch watching TV, I found myself studying him. He was scrolling through his phone, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the screen. He looked so at ease, so content. And yet, I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest, the feeling that something was missing. "Are you okay?" he asked, glancing up at me. "Yeah," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just tired." He didn't push, and for that, I was both grateful and a little sad. A week later, I ran into Simon at a coffee shop. It was completely unexpected. I was there to grab a latte before work, and he was sitting at a corner table with a sketch pad and a cup of black coffee. "Caroline," he said, looking genuinely surprised. "Hey." "Hi," I replied, my heart racing. We ended up talking again, this time for nearly an hour. He told me about his work as a graphic designer, his love of traveling, and the book he was currently reading. And I told him things I hadn't even shared with Mark, about my dreams of writing, the creative projects I'd abandoned, and the restlessness I couldn't seem to shake. By the time I left the coffee shop, I knew I was in trouble. Simon wasn't just a fleeting distraction, he was someone who made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. But I couldn't ignore the fact that I was still with Mark, and that I still cared about him deeply. As I walked home, the weight of my situation began to sink in. How could I be honest with Mark without breaking his heart? And how could I explore what I felt with Simon without betraying the person I'd built my life with? That evening, I confided in Emma, hoping she could offer some clarity. "I feel so guilty," I admitted, my voice trembling. "Mark doesn't deserve this. But at the same time, I don't know if I can ignore what I'm feeling." Emma frowned, clearly torn. "I think you need to figure out what you really want," she said. "This isn't just about Simon or Mark, it's about you. What do you need to feel happy?" Her words stayed with me long after she left. In the days that followed, I avoided both Simon and Mark, unsure of how to move forward. I felt like I was standing at a crossroads, and no matter which path I chose, someone would get hurt. One evening, as I sat alone in the apartment, I began writing in a journal Emma had given me months ago. I love Mark, but I'm not sure if love is enough. And I'm drawn to Simon, but what does that mean for the life I've built? How do I choose between comfort and freedom, stability and desire? And how do I do it without losing myself? The days following my conversation with Emma felt like a blur. My thoughts swirled in a never-ending loop, each one more confusing than the last. I tried to focus on work, on routines, on anything that could distract me from the choices I knew I had to face. But no matter how hard I tried, Simon's words, and the way he made me feel, lingered in the back of my mind. Mark was as steady as ever, his presence a reminder of the life we'd built together. But instead of comfort, his steadiness began to feel like a mirror, reflecting all the ways I'd stopped being honest with myself. I found myself pulling away from Mark in subtle ways. I worked late more often, feigning exhaustion when he suggested spending time together. I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed space to think. But the truth was, I couldn't face him, not when I was carrying this weight of guilt and uncertainty. One evening, as we ate dinner in near silence, he looked up and said, "Is everything okay? You've seemed distant lately." My stomach twisted. "It's just work," I lied. "Things have been stressful." He nodded, accepting my explanation without question. His trust only made the guilt worse. A few days later, I received a text from Simon. "Hey. I know things are complicated, but I'd love to talk. No pressure, just coffee. Let me know." I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to erase him from my life and focus on fixing things with Mark. But another part of me, one I was starting to understand, wanted to see him, to explore the feelings I couldn't seem to suppress. After hours of deliberation, I replied, "Okay. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. Meeting Simon again felt like stepping into a different world. As we sat across from each other, the air between us buzzed with unspoken words. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," he admitted, his voice soft. "Neither was I," I replied, my hands wrapped tightly around my coffee cup. He hesitated, then said, "I don't want to complicate your life, Caroline. But I can't pretend there's nothing here." His honesty caught me off guard. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I care about Mark, but I feel like I've been asleep for years. And you've made me realize how much I've been holding back." Simon nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe it's not about choosing between him and me. Maybe it's about figuring out what you want, what you need to feel whole." Simon's words stayed with me long after I left the coffee shop. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't just about him or Mark, it was about me. I'd spent so much time trying to be the perfect partner, the perfect version of myself, that I'd lost sight of who I really was. That night, as Mark slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I knew I couldn't keep avoiding the truth. The next evening, I asked Mark if we could talk. He looked surprised but concerned, setting aside his book to give me his full attention. "I've been struggling," I began, my voice trembling. "Not with you, but with us. With myself." Mark frowned, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I feel like I've lost a part of myself," I admitted. "I've been so focused on being what I thought you needed that I forgot about my own needs, my own dreams." His expression softened, though I could see the hurt in his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I was scared," I said, tears spilling over. "Scared of hurting you, scared of admitting that I wasn't happy." To my surprise, Mark didn't get angry. Instead, he reached for my hand. "I love you, Caroline," he said. "But I don't want you to feel like you have to give up who you are to be with me. If something needs to change, let's figure it out together." His words brought a mix of relief and sadness. I knew he meant them, but I also knew that this journey was one I had to take on my own. After our conversation, I decided to take some time for myself. I booked a weekend away at a small cabin in the mountains, hoping the solitude would help me sort through my emotions. Surrounded by nature, I spent hours journaling, reflecting on my relationship with Mark, my connection with Simon, and the person I wanted to become. On the last night of my retreat, I wrote a letter to myself, a promise to be honest, to prioritize my needs, and to embrace the messy, beautiful process of figuring out who I was. You don't have to have all the answers, I wrote. But you do have to start asking the right questions. When I returned home, I felt lighter, more centered. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew I was ready to face it with honesty and courage. Mark greeted me with a hug, his eyes searching mine. "How was your trip?" "Eye-opening," I replied. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was telling the truth. Returning home from the cabin felt like stepping into a world that was both familiar and new. Everything looked the same, our apartment, Mark's smile, the rhythm of our shared life, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of clarity, a sense of what I needed to do. It wasn't going to be easy. I still loved Mark in so many ways, but I also knew that staying in a relationship where I wasn't fully myself would only lead to more pain for both of us. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I turned to Mark and said, "Can we talk?" He nodded, his expression calm but wary. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I began, my voice steady but soft. "About us, about myself, about what I want for the future." Mark set down his drink, giving me his full attention. "Okay," he said. "Tell me." I took a deep breath. "I love you, but I feel like I've lost a part of myself in our relationship. And it's not your fault, it's something I let happen. But I need to figure out who I am outside of us, and I don't know if I can do that while we're still together." His face fell, and I could see the hurt in his eyes. But instead of anger, there was understanding. "I've noticed that you've been pulling away," he admitted. "I just didn't know how to bring it up." "I didn't want to hurt you," I said, tears welling in my eyes. "You're not," he replied, his voice quiet but firm. "If this is what you need, I won't stand in your way." The decision to end our relationship was mutual, but that didn't make it any less painful. Packing my things and leaving the apartment we'd shared for years felt like tearing a piece of my heart out. Mark helped me carry my boxes to the car, his silence heavy but kind. As we stood in the parking lot, he said, "I hope you find what you're looking for, Caroline. You deserve to be happy." "So do you," I replied, my voice breaking. We hugged one last time, and as I drove away, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Moving into a small studio apartment was both liberating and terrifying. The space felt empty at first, a stark contrast to the life I'd built with Mark. But slowly, I began to fill it, with plants, books, and art supplies that reminded me of the creative passions I'd once loved. I threw myself into journaling and therapy, digging deep into the emotions I'd buried for so long. It wasn't just about Mark or Simon, it was about rediscovering myself, my dreams, and the person I wanted to become. A few weeks after the breakup, Simon reached out. His message was simple, "Hey. I heard about you and Mark. How are you holding up?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "I'm okay. Just taking things one day at a time." His response came quickly, "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." I decided to meet Simon for coffee. This time, it felt different, less like an escape and more like a step toward understanding what our connection meant. As we sat across from each other, I felt a mix of nervousness and curiosity. "How have you been?" he asked, his tone gentle. "It's been a roller coaster," I admitted. "But I think I'm finally starting to figure things out." Simon nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "You seem lighter," he said. "Maybe I am," I replied, smiling for the first time in what felt like ages. Simon and I continued to see each other, but this time, I set clear boundaries. I wasn't ready to dive into another relationship, I needed time to heal, to grow, and to fully understand what I wanted. To his credit, Simon respected that. He didn't push or rush me, instead offering support and encouragement as I navigated this new chapter of my life. With my evenings no longer filled with the routines of a shared relationship, I had time to explore the things I'd once loved. I started attending art classes, reconnecting with old friends, and even trying new hobbies like hiking and pottery. Each small step felt like a victory, a reminder that I was capable of building a life that felt true to me. One quiet evening, I sat down and wrote a letter to Mark. I didn't send it, it was more for me than for him. "Thank you for the years we shared," I wrote. "You showed me kindness and love when I needed it most, and I'll always be grateful for that. I'm sorry I couldn't be the person you deserved, but I hope this journey brings us both the happiness we're searching for." Writing those words felt like closing a chapter, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. As the weeks turned into months, I began to see the outlines of a life I could be proud of. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of doubt and sadness, but it was mine. Simon remained a presence in my life, but he wasn't the center of it. I was learning to be my own anchor, to find strength in myself rather than in someone else. Life doesn't always give you clear answers, but it does give you choices. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making choices that aligned with who I truly was. As I stood in my studio one evening, surrounded by the chaos of new projects and possibilities, I smiled. This was just the beginning. Life after Mark wasn't as dramatic as I had feared. It was quieter, like the world had exhaled and left me in a space where I could finally hear my own thoughts. There were no clear answers or immediate epiphanies, just small, deliberate steps toward understanding who I was outside of a relationship. Simon remained a constant, but he was more of a companion on my journey than a destination. Our connection was real, but I was determined not to let it define me. I had learned that rediscovering myself had to come first. Moving into my studio apartment was both liberating and challenging. The silence could be deafening at times, especially on nights when I would have been curled up with Mark, watching a movie or talking about our day. But that silence also gave me room to grow. I started journaling daily, capturing my thoughts and feelings with brutal honesty. The pages were messy and raw, but they became a mirror, reflecting the parts of myself I'd neglected. I also began cooking for myself, nothing fancy, just simple meals that felt nourishing. It was a small act of care that reminded me I was capable of looking after myself. One afternoon, as I walked through the park, camera in hand, I saw a group of children chasing bubbles. Their laughter filled the air, and I couldn't help but smile. I lifted my camera and snapped a photo, a candid moment of joy and innocence. When I looked at the image later, I realized it captured something I'd been missing in my own life, the ability to find happiness in the present, without overthinking the past or the future. That photo became the first in a series I called Finding Light, a collection of images that celebrated the small, beautiful moments of everyday life. With my newfound independence came a desire to reconnect with people I'd drifted away from during my relationship with Mark. One of those people was Sarah, a college friend who had always encouraged my creative pursuits. When we met for coffee, it was like no time had passed. We talked for hours, sharing stories and catching up on everything we'd missed. "I always knew you'd find your way back to yourself," she said, smiling. "You just needed the space to do it." Her words stayed with me, a reminder that sometimes the people who know us best see things we can't. Simon continued to be a part of my life, but our interactions were light and easy, coffee dates, walks in the park, and the occasional movie night. He never pushed for more, always respecting the boundaries I'd set. "I just want you to be happy," he told me one evening as we sat on a bench overlooking the city. "Whatever that looks like." His patience was both comforting and freeing. It allowed me to explore our connection without feeling pressured to define it. Despite the progress I was making, there were still moments of doubt. I'd catch myself missing Mark, wondering if I'd made the right decision. One evening, as I sorted through old photos, I came across a picture of us at the beach, both of us laughing, our faces glowing with sun and happiness. Tears welled in my eyes as I held the photo, but I reminded myself that those memories didn't negate the need for growth. Mark had been a significant part of my life, but holding on to the past wouldn't allow me to move forward. As my Finding Light series grew, I decided to share it online. The response was overwhelming. People from all over the world connected with the images, sharing their own stories of finding beauty in the everyday. One message stood out: "Your photos remind me to look for the small joys in life. Thank you for sharing your light." The message brought tears to my eyes. It was a reminder that my journey wasn't just about me, it was about creating something that could inspire others. Over time, my feelings for Simon deepened. But instead of rushing into a relationship, I took the time to reflect on what I truly wanted. During a quiet dinner at his place, I finally felt ready to have an honest conversation. "Simon," I began, setting down my fork. "I need you to know how much I value what we've built. But I also need you to know that I'm still figuring things out." He nodded, his expression gentle. "I never expected you to have all the answers. I just want to be part of your journey, whatever that looks like." His words brought a sense of peace I hadn't realized I needed. As the months passed, I continued to grow into myself. I pursued new projects, traveled to places I'd always dreamed of visiting, and deepened my connections with the people who mattered most. Simon and I grew closer, but our relationship remained rooted in mutual respect and a shared commitment to supporting each other's growth. For the first time, I felt like I was building a life that reflected who I truly was. One evening, as I stood on my balcony watching the sunset, I thought about how far I'd come. The girl I'd been, the one who felt trapped and unsure, was still a part of me, but she no longer defined me. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't need them. What mattered was that I was living authentically, embracing the messiness of life with open arms. As Simon joined me on the balcony, wrapping his arms around me, he asked, "What's next for you?" I smiled, the possibilities stretching out before me. "Whatever feels right," I replied. And for the first time, I truly believed it. The new chapter one had begun felt both exhilarating and uncertain. Every day brought new challenges and opportunities, each one asking me to dig deeper into who I was and what I wanted. Simon remained by my side, but his presence didn't overshadow my journey. Instead, it complemented it, a partnership that felt more like an anchor than a tether. Through trial and error, I was learning that love didn't have to mean losing yourself. It could be a space where two people grew individually while still nurturing their connection. The success of my Finding Light series encouraged me to take bigger risks with my work. One afternoon, as I reviewed the feedback on my latest online post, I decided to pitch the series to a gallery I'd always admired. Submitting the proposal was nerve-wracking. I'd never put myself out there so boldly. But to my surprise, the gallery's curator loved the concept. "We'd love to feature your work in an upcoming exhibit," she said during our call. "Your perspective is refreshing, and I think it'll resonate with a lot of people." The idea of showcasing my photos in a physical space, where people could experience them in person, filled me with excitement and fear. When I told Simon about the exhibit, his reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "That's amazing, Caroline," he said, his eyes lighting up. "You deserve this." His belief in me was unwavering, but it wasn't overbearing. He didn't try to take control or solve my problems, he simply stood beside me, offering encouragement when I needed it. "You've got this," he said one evening as I fretted over the logistics of the exhibit. "And even if something goes wrong, it's just part of the process. You'll figure it out." Emma, who had been my rock during the upheaval of my breakup with Mark, remained a constant source of support. "You're glowing," she said one afternoon as we sat in a cafe, sipping lattes. "It's like you finally found your footing." "Maybe I have," I replied, smiling. "But it's still a work in progress." She nodded. "It always is. But the important thing is that you're building something that feels true to you." The opening night of my exhibit was a whirlwind. Friends, strangers, and fellow artists filled the gallery, their conversations buzzing with energy. Seeing my photos displayed on the walls, each one representing a moment of clarity, growth, or connection, was surreal. As I wandered through the space, I overheard snippets of conversations. "This one feels like hope. It's like she's showing us how to find beauty in the ordinary." Those words felt like validation, not just of my art, but of the choices I'd made to rediscover myself. Simon arrived halfway through the evening, a bouquet of sunflowers in hand. "I'm so proud of you," he said, pulling me into a hug. Toward the end of the night, I noticed someone standing near one of my photos, a candid shot of a couple laughing together on a park bench. It was Mark. My heart skipped a beat as our eyes met, but I quickly reminded myself to stay calm. "Hi," he said, his voice warm but tentative. "I heard about your exhibit and thought I'd come see it." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely touched. We talked for a while, catching up on our lives. He told me about his new job and the things he'd been exploring since our breakup. "You seem happy," he said, smiling. "It's good to see." "You too," I replied, meaning it. Our conversation felt like closure, a gentle acknowledgement of what we'd shared and how we'd both grown since parting ways. As my relationship with Simon deepened, I remained vigilant about maintaining my sense of self. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, I said, "I want to make sure we're always honest with each other, about what we need, what we're feeling." "Absolutely," he replied, handing me a cutting board. "Relationships should be about supporting each other, not holding each other back." His words echoed my own beliefs, and I felt a surge of gratitude for the connection we'd built. Sitting alone in my apartment one evening, I pulled out an old journal from the early days of my breakup. Flipping through its pages, I was struck by how far I'd come. The woman who had written those entries was scared and uncertain, but she'd taken the first steps toward reclaiming her life. Now, I felt more grounded, more confident, and more willing to embrace the unknown. With the exhibit behind me and new opportunities on the horizon, I felt a sense of excitement about what was to come. There were still challenges to face, but I knew I had the tools to navigate them. Simon and I often talked about the future, not in terms of rigid plans, but as a series of possibilities we could explore together. "I don't know what's next," I admitted one evening as we watched the sunset from a rooftop. "That's the best part," he said, smiling. "We get to figure it out as we go." Life isn't about reaching a single destination, it's about the moments of growth, connection, and discovery along the way. As I sit here reflecting on my journey, I'm filled with gratitude for every choice I've made, every mistake I've learned from, and every step that's brought me closer to the person I'm becoming. This is just the beginning. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and full of potential. The exhibit's success opened new doors, leading to invitations for collaborations and requests for commissions. My inbox buzzed with opportunities, each one a reminder of how far I'd come. Simon was a steady presence, but our relationship wasn't the center of my universe, and that was exactly how it needed to be. We were partners, not crutches, and that made our connection feel stronger. Still, the future remained a question mark. I wasn't afraid of the unknown, but I wasn't entirely sure how to navigate it either. One afternoon, I received an email that stopped me in my tracks. It was from a curator at an international art festival in Paris, inviting me to showcase my work as part of a special exhibit on resilience and transformation. The thought of taking my art across the ocean was thrilling, but it also felt daunting. Paris was a world away from the life I'd built here, and spending months abroad would mean leaving everything behind, at least temporarily. When I told Simon about the offer, he smiled. "That's incredible, Caroline. You have to do it." "But what about us?" I asked, my voice tinged with worry. "We'll figure it out," he said simply. "This is your dream. Don't let anything hold you back." The weeks leading up to my departure were a whirlwind of planning, creating, and saying goodbye. Friends threw me a small going-away party, filling the room with laughter, encouragement, and promises to stay in touch. Simon drove me to the airport on the day of my flight. As we stood by the gate, he pulled me into a tight hug. "I'll miss you," he said, his voice steady but soft. "I'll miss you too," I replied. "But thank you for supporting me. It means everything." "You're going to be amazing," he said, stepping back with a smile. "Now go show Paris what you can do." Arriving in Paris felt like stepping into a dream. The city buzzed with creativity and inspiration, its streets filled with artists, musicians, and writers chasing their passions. The art festival was a whirlwind of activity, each day packed with meetings, workshops, and preparations for the exhibit. I found myself surrounded by creators from all over the world, each with their own unique perspective. One of them, a painter named Amélie, became an instant friend. Her bold, colorful work reflected her fearless approach to life, and her energy was infectious. "You're too careful," she told me one evening over wine. "Stop worrying about what people think and just create." Her advice stuck with me, pushing me to take risks in my work. One evening, as I walked along the Seine, I thought about everything that had led me here. The mistakes, the heartbreak, the moments of doubt, they had all been part of the journey. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace with my past. Every choice I'd made, no matter how difficult, had brought me to this moment. Opening night at the festival was electric. The gallery buzzed with energy as visitors wandered through the exhibit, pausing to take in the pieces and read the accompanying stories. One of the photos, a black and white image of a woman standing in the rain, her face tilted upward, drew particular attention. "What inspired this one?" a journalist asked during an interview. "It's about resilience," I replied. "About finding strength in the storm and letting it transform you." The response was overwhelmingly positive, and I left the gallery that night feeling a mix of pride and humility. While the festival was fulfilling, being away from Simon was harder than I'd expected. We talked often, but the time difference in our busy schedules made communication challenging. "I miss you," he said one night during a video call. "I miss you too," I replied. "But I'll be home soon." His patience and understanding were a comfort, but I couldn't ignore the toll the distance was taking. A month into the festival, I received an unexpected message: "Check the arrivals board at Charles de Gaulle. I have a surprise for you." My heart raced as I rushed to the airport, and there he was, Simon, standing near the baggage claim with a bouquet of daisies in hand. "What are you doing here?" I asked, tears welling in my eyes. "I couldn't wait to see you," he said, pulling me into a hug. Having him in Paris, even for just a week, was like a balm for my soul. We explored the city together, creating memories that felt both magical and grounding. By the time the festival ended, I felt like a different person. The experience had challenged me in ways I hadn't anticipated, pushing me to grow not just as an artist, but as a person. Returning home was bittersweet. I was excited to reconnect with Simon and my friends, but I also knew that Paris had left an indelible mark on me. Simon and I continued to navigate the complexities of balancing our individual dreams with our relationship. It wasn't always easy, but we approached every challenge with honesty and a shared commitment to supporting each other. As for my art, the success of the Paris exhibit opened new opportunities, speaking engagements, collaborations, and even the chance to mentor emerging artists. Life isn't about perfection, it's about the moments of growth, connection, and discovery that shape who we are. As I reflect on my journey, I'm reminded that every choice I've made, every risk I've taken, has brought me closer to the life I'm building, a life that feels authentic, creative, and full of love. This is just the beginning. Life after Paris was a blend of nostalgia and forward momentum. I carried the city with me, the narrow streets, the vibrant conversations, the electric hum of creativity. But I also knew it wasn't about holding on to the past, it was about taking the lessons I'd learned and weaving them into the fabric of my present. Simon and I found our rhythm again, though it wasn't without its challenges. The distance had tested us in ways we hadn't anticipated, but it had also shown us how deeply we valued each other. We were two people walking our own paths, but always willing to meet in the middle. As for my art, the Paris exhibit had catapulted me into a world I hadn't dared to dream of before. Opportunities seemed to appear around every corner, but with them came new questions about what I truly wanted for my future. One day, I received an email from a publisher who had seen my Finding Light series. They wanted to turn it into a coffee table book, complete with essays about the stories behind each photo. The idea thrilled me, but it also felt daunting. Writing had always been a private outlet for me, something I shared only in fragments. But the opportunity to merge my photography with my words was too meaningful to pass up. As I began drafting the essays, I found myself revisiting parts of my journey I hadn't fully processed. The act of writing became a form of healing, a way to honor the mistakes, heartbreaks, and triumphs that had shaped me. With so much happening professionally, I struggled to find balance in my personal life. Simon was endlessly supportive, but I could tell he missed the simplicity of our early days together. One evening, as we cooked dinner in my tiny kitchen, he said, "I feel like I barely see you anymore." His words stung because they were true. Between book deadlines, art commissions, and speaking engagements, my time had become a precious commodity. "I know," I said softly. "I'm trying to figure out how to manage everything." "Just don't forget what's important," he replied, his tone gentle but firm. His honesty forced me to take a hard look at my priorities. In an effort to reconnect, Simon and I planned a weekend getaway to a quiet cabin in the mountains. There was no Wi-Fi, no cell service, just us, the trees, and the crackling of the fire. We spent our days hiking and our nights talking about everything we'd been too busy to say. "I don't want us to lose this," he said one night as we lay under a blanket of stars. "Neither do I," I replied, taking his hand. The trip reminded me that success meant little if I couldn't share it with the people who mattered most. While sorting through old files for the book, I came across a forgotten photo from the early days of my relationship with Mark. It was a candid shot of us laughing at a party, our faces full of unguarded joy. Seeing it brought a wave of emotion, not regret, but gratitude. Mark had been an important chapter in my life, and while it hadn't ended the way I'd once imagined, it had taught me lessons I still carried with me. I decided to include the photo in the book, paired with an essay about the beauty of impermanence and the courage it takes to let go of what no longer serves us. The launch of the coffee table book was a surreal experience. Friends, family, and even strangers gathered at the event, flipping through its pages and sharing their reactions. One woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Your story, it feels like mine," she said. "Thank you for sharing it." Her words reminded me of the power of vulnerability, how opening up about our journeys can create connections that transcend boundaries. A few weeks after the book launch, Simon and I were walking through the park when he stopped suddenly. "There's something I need to say," he began, his expression serious. My heart raced, but his words weren't what I expected. "I don't want to rush us into anything, but I do want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like. I just need to know if that's what you want too." His question wasn't about marriage or grand gestures, it was about intention, about choosing each other in the midst of our ever-changing lives. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I want that too." On the anniversary of my Paris exhibit, I took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened since. The girl who had felt trapped and unsure had grown into a woman who embraced her imperfections and celebrated her progress. I thought about Mark, about Emma, about the countless people who had shaped my journey. Each of them had left a mark on me, and for that, I was deeply grateful. The future remained a mystery, but for the first time, I wasn't trying to predict it. I was content to let it unfold, trusting that each step would lead me closer to the life I was meant to live. Simon and I often talked about what came next, not as a rigid plan, but as an evolving dream. As we stood on a rooftop one evening, watching the city lights twinkle below, he asked, "Where do you see us in 5 years?" Happy, I replied, smiling. Wherever that takes us. Life isn't about reaching a final destination, it's about the moments that shape us along the way. As I sit here, writing these words, I'm filled with gratitude for every choice, every mistake, and every leap of faith that brought me here. The journey is ongoing, and that's what makes it beautiful. Here's to the unfolding path, and to the courage to walk it.